Hello everyone, I'm very glad that you're joining this story. Subscribe, like and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
SOL 6 title. When I asked for help with my hospital bills, my family said, "You're old enough to handle it." 2 weeks later, they threw my brother a lavish wedding, and now they act shocked that I cut them off. Funny how you're family until you cost them money. I stared at the cracks running along the hospital ceiling like a roadmap to nowhere, listening to the low hum of the fluorescent lights buzzing over my head, the four-pump clicking in rhythm with my slow, dry heartbeat. I had been lying there for what felt like days, skin prickling against the rough sheets, trying to muster up the nerve to pick up the damn phone one more time. I kept thinking, maybe this time they'll answer different. Maybe this time they'll say what you dream of hearing when you're scared and broken sick. "Don't worry, Jake, we got you." But instead, my phone lit up with that last text from my sister, a message so cold it might as well have been written on a block of ice. "You're old enough to handle it." That was it. 8 little words to slap 30 years of loyalty and late-night favors straight out of my chest. The bill sat heavy on the table next to me, one corner crumpled from how many times ID picked it up and put it back down, like maybe if I touched it enough, it would just disappear. $38,000. 38,000. I didn't have that kind of money hidden in a sock drawer. Hell, I barely had enough to cover next month's rent if the job let me back on light duty. I closed my eyes and tried to think about something else, anything else, but my mind kept circling the same damn drain. Was I wrong for asking? Was I stupid for thinking family meant more than blood and Christmas cards? I could still hear my mother's voice from years ago, soft and sweet, after I skinned my knee falling off my bike. Family takes care of family, always. I guess always had an expiration date no one bothered to tell me about. The nurse came in to check my four, humming some country song I didn't recognize, but I barely noticed. The weight in my chest wasn't from the infection anymore. It was from something heavier, something colder, something that didn't show up on any x-ray. It was the realization that no one was coming. No cavalry, no hugs, no casseroles wrapped in tinfoil and sympathy. Just me, alone, with a plastic wristband digging into my skin and a future that looked a whole lot like the cracked ceiling over my head, broken, forgotten, and ugly. I should have seen it coming, really. There had been signs, canceled plans, half-hearted birthday calls, excuses stacked so high you could build a damn ladder to heaven with them. But when you're used to carrying the weight for everyone else, you don't notice how heavy it's gotten until your own knees give out. Lying there, I felt something snap, quiet, and sure, like a bone under too much pressure. It wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. It was just final. If family meant smiling at weddings, but vanishing at hospital beds, if it meant offering toasts but not hands, then maybe I didn't need it as bad as I thought. Maybe the people who could leave you bleeding without a second thought weren't really your family at all. I picked up my phone one last time, looked at the thread of messages that ended with their silence, and then set it back down for good. They could keep their speeches about loyalty and tradition. They could keep their pretty little lies. I was done asking. I was done hoping. I was done pretending. And somewhere under the crushing weight of bills and betrayal, a tiny part of me, the part that hadn't given up yet, started to think maybe being alone wasn't the worst thing that could happen after all. Because worse than being alone was realizing you'd been alone all along and just hadn't wanted to believe it. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I didn't even feel sorry for myself. I just stared at that cracked ceiling until the morning light leaked through the cheap blinds, wondering when exactly ID stopped being family and started being a burden. There is a certain kind of tired that does not come from working a long shift or staying up too late, but from years of believing in something that turns out to be hollow inside. And that is the kind of tired I felt sitting in my worn-out recliner 2 days after getting discharged from the hospital. My name is Jake Turner, and if you had asked me 3 months ago, I would have told you my life was simple but good, blue-collar job fixing heating and cooling systems, an apartment that smelled faintly of old books and coffee, a battered Ford truck that coughed in the winter, but always got me where I needed to go, and a family who, if nothing else, I thought would be there when it mattered. Turns out, the things you think are carved in stone are sometimes just written in wet sand, waiting for the tide to wash them away when you least expect it. I had been plugging along just fine, working my 40 hours a week, saving a little here and there, living the kind of quiet, stubborn life that people stop noticing after a while. Then came the night the pain hit me, sharp and blinding, knocking me to my knees in my tiny kitchen, the pot of spaghetti I had been cooking crashing to the floor and sending sauce splattering across the tiles like some bad crime scene. The doctors called it a perfect storm, a burst appendix, infection already spreading fast enough that if I had waited another hour, I might have been meeting my maker instead of that grim-faced surgeon. I woke up after surgery with a plastic tube draining God knows what out of my side, a row of staples running across my belly like some grotesque zipper, and a mountain of debt taller than anything I had ever tried to climb. For a few days, I told myself I could handle it. I figured maybe I could pick up some extra work, sell a few things, tighten my belt even more than usual, even though it already felt like there wasn't a whole lot left to tighten. But every time the mail carrier dropped another envelope through the slot, I felt the noose pull tighter around my throat, each bill stamped in red ink like a fresh slap to the face. It's funny how pride can keep you warm until it doesn't, and after the third night in a row sitting in the dark, because I was too scared to turn the lights on and see the bills piled up on the coffee table, I swallowed what little pride I had left and picked up my phone. My sister, Laura, answered on the third ring, her voice bright and chirpy like she had just stepped out of a damn Pinterest ad, and for a moment, I almost hung up. But I didn't. I told her about the surgery, the bills, the hole I was falling into faster than I could crawl out. I didn't ask for a lot, just a loan, something I could pay back little by little once I was back on my feet. I expected hesitation. I expected questions. What I didn't expect was the flat, icy way she said, "Jake, you're old enough to handle your own problems," like I was some wayward teenager asking for bail money after a bar fight. There wasn't even a pause, not a breath of sympathy, just that damn sentence hanging there between us like a noose I had tied myself. I tried to joke, to lighten the mood, said something about how I guessed being family didn't come with an emergency fund, but she didn't laugh. She just said she had to get back to helping her youngest with a school project and hung up without so much as a goodbye. I sat there for a long time after the call ended, the phone heavy and useless in my hand, feeling more alone than I had in my entire life. Eventually, I called my brother, Ryan, thinking maybe he would be different, but the conversation went even worse, with him barely hiding his annoyance as he rattled off a list of expenses he and his fiancée were dealing with for the event of the year they had been planning. By the time I hung up with him, my hands were shaking, whether from rage or heartbreak I couldn't tell, and it hit me, if family was supposed to be your safety net, then mine had more holes than a drunk fisherman's catch. And now, just because I needed a little help, a little kindness, I was no longer Jake, the guy who came to fix your leaking sink on Thanksgiving, who lent you rent money without a second thought when you blew your paycheck on Christmas gifts, who babysat your screaming toddler so you could go drink yourself stupid on a Saturday night. No, now I was Jake, the problem, the burden, the thing to be politely ignored and quietly pushed away. And that's when it really started to sink in, the kind of realization that doesn't come with fireworks or shouting matches, but slides in slow and mean like a knife between the ribs. Maybe family wasn't what you were born into. Maybe family was the people who showed up when you needed them, not the ones who sent you empty words and fake smiles from behind their safe, happy lives. And it got me thinking, hard and ugly, what would you do if the people you trusted the most turned their backs when you needed them the most? Would you keep knocking on a door that had already been slammed in your face? Or would you finally turn around and walk away, even if it meant walking into the dark alone? The night wore on, heavy and silent, the kind of silence that roars louder than any argument ever could, and somewhere deep down, a new feeling started to take root inside me, something colder, harder, something that tasted a little like anger and a lot like freedom. Because if help was a four-letter word in my family, Maybe it was time I learned a few new ones of my own. The funny thing about betrayal is that it rarely hits you all at once. No, it seeps in slow like a cold draft under a locked door, chilling you from the inside out before you even realize what's happening. And sitting there on my battered old couch, staring at another unpaid medical bill, I found myself doing what every idiot does when they get kicked in the teeth by the people they thought would protect them. I made excuses for them. Maybe they were stressed, I told myself, gripping the paper so hard my knuckles turned white under the strain. Maybe Laura had her hands full with the kids and Ryan was drowning under the pressure of the upcoming wedding. And who was I, after all, to expect them to drop everything and swoop in to save me just because I happened to catch a bad break? I sat there spinning those lies like cotton candy in my mind, sweet and useless, because the truth was harder to swallow than any excuse I could invent. And the truth was that they didn't want to help, because helping meant sacrificing something: time, money, comfort. And somewhere along the way, the people I called family had decided that Jake Turner wasn't worth the cost. It would have been easier if they had just come out and said it, if they had looked me in the eye and told me flat out that I wasn't their problem anymore. But instead they wrapped their indifference up in nice, polite words and left me to rot with a smile. And somehow that made it worse, because it let me keep pretending that maybe, just maybe, I was the one who was wrong. I found myself thinking back to when we were kids, running barefoot through the dirt roads behind our house, scraping our knees and laughing like the world was ours for the taking. And I remembered Dad sitting us all down one sticky summer evening after Ryan broke his arm falling out of the oak tree in the backyard, his voice low and serious as he said, "Family means you take care of each other, no matter what, no excuses." Those words had sunk into my bones so deep that even 30 years later, they still echoed in the back of my mind whenever life got ugly. And maybe that was the real betrayal, not that they failed me, but that they taught me to believe they never would. The bills kept coming, each one heavier than the last, and with every envelope I ripped open, the bitterness inside me grew a little more, thick and sour like spoiled milk. Until there were days I could barely stand to look at my own reflection without feeling the shame burning behind my eyes. I started to notice little things I hadn't before, like how every time I called, their voices got a little tighter, a little more impatient, like they were just waiting for me to hurry up and get off the line. And I realized with a sick sort of clarity that I had become the family charity case, the embarrassing uncle you don't invite to Thanksgiving because he might ask for gas money. Meanwhile, the wedding talk was everywhere, as impossible to avoid as a toothache, and it wasn't just casual chatter either. It was big, loud, splashy talk about how Ryan's fiancée had picked out a $2,000 dress, about the private venue they had booked overlooking the lake, about the caterer flying in from another state just to serve gourmet tacos and artisan cocktails, whatever the hell that meant. I heard about the wedding favors that cost more than my rent, about the open bar that was going to have top-shelf whiskey and imported beers, about the custom fireworks show planned to end the night with a bang, so loud the whole county would hear it, and through it all, not one word, not one syllable about maybe setting aside a little something for the brother who once bailed your sorry ass out of jail at 2 a.m. without ever telling a soul. No, that brother didn't fit into the picture they were painting now, all shiny and polished and perfect, because sick and broke isn't the kind of story you want your fancy new in-laws hearing about during cocktail hour. I thought about calling them again, about trying one more time to explain how bad things were getting, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized that they already knew, and worse, that they didn't care. And let me tell you, there's nothing quite like realizing that the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally have conditions after all, and that one of those conditions is that you better not need anything from them when it's inconvenient. I sat back on the couch, the springs groaning under my weight, and stared at the cracked ceiling for what felt like hours, the bitterness inside me solidifying into something hard and sharp and dangerous. Something that whispered to me late at night when the world was silent except for the hum of the fridge and the occasional creak of the settling building. It whispered that maybe love wasn't enough, that maybe loyalty was a sucker's game, that maybe the only person you could really count on was the one staring back at you from the mirror, and even he had his limits. Somewhere deep down, a part of me still wanted to believe in the fairy tale, the one where blood is thicker than water and family always comes through in the end. But that part was dying fast, and the funeral was going to be small. Because there wasn't anyone left to mourn it. The wedding was set for 2 weeks from now, and judging by the way everyone was talking, it was going to be the kind of blowout people remembered for years, the kind of night where nothing else mattered except laughter and music and love, and it made me wonder, not for the first time, where exactly I had gone wrong. Because looking back, it seemed like maybe I had spent my whole life giving and giving and giving, thinking that someday it would all come back around when I needed it most, and now here I was, with empty hands and a heart so bruised it barely beat. And the worst part, the part that kept me up long after the rest of the world had gone to sleep, was that I still missed them, still loved them, still wanted to believe there was a place for me in that world of fairy lights and perfect smiles. But deep down, I knew better, and that knowledge was colder than any hospital bed, heavier than any unpaid bill, and more final than any wedding vow. Because family values are a hell of a thing, right up until they aren't. The thing about pain is that after a while, you stop flinching when it hits you, you just sort of sit there and take it like rain against a window, dull and steady, soaking you through before you even think to run. 2 weeks after that last phone call, 2 weeks after I had begged for a hand and got slapped with cold silence instead, I found myself alone in my apartment, the late summer heat thick as syrup in the air. A fan pushing stale air around the room without doing a damn bit of good, and me scrolling through Facebook like some kind of masochist. At first, it was innocent enough, just boredom and muscle memory guiding my thumb down the screen, looking for a funny meme or a bad joke, something to lift the lead weight pressing down on my chest. I told myself it didn't matter what was out there, that I didn't care about their lives or their parties, that I was stronger than all that old noise. I lied to myself like I had been lying for weeks, but the truth always finds you, even when you close your eyes and pretend otherwise. It didn't take long to find it. Bright, bold pictures screaming for attention, tagged with names I hadn't heard from since high school, captions bursting with glee about the event of the year. There was Ryan, standing tall and smug in a tuxedo that probably cost more than my hospital stay, his arm around his new wife. Both of them looking like they had just stepped out of a magazine ad for people who never had to worry about scraping together the rent money. The venue was the kind of place you only see in glossy magazines left in doctors' offices, all sweeping staircases and chandeliers that looked like they belonged in a castle. Rows and rows of pristine white chairs lined up under an enormous silk canopy, the kind that costs more to rent for a night than I earned in a month. Tables groaning under the weight of food too fancy to pronounce, flowers cascading in giant, ridiculous towers, fountains of champagne shooting arcs of glittering liquid into the air like something out of a goddamn fairy tale. I kept scrolling even though every nerve in my body was screaming at me to stop, my stomach tightening into a sick little knot as the videos started autoplaying. Ryan giving a tearful speech about how important family is, his voice cracking just enough to seem genuine to anyone who didn't know him like I did. People cheering, laughing, clinking glasses together in perfect little moments of joy, the kind of joy that apparently didn't have room for one more chair at the table. There was no invitation for me. No last-minute text or guilty phone call. Not even a cursory Facebook tag to let me know they were thinking of me. I was invisible, a ghost who didn't even warrant a mention, a footnote scratched out of the story of their perfect day. Guess I wasn't family enough for the guest list either. I sat there, the phone heavy in my hand, heart pounding so loud I could barely hear the muted television buzzing in the background. My mouth tasted like ashes, and I realized I had been clenching my jaw so tight my teeth ached. I wanted to tell myself it didn't matter, that weddings were expensive and seating was limited, that maybe they figured I wouldn't feel up to it anyway, but the lies didn't come as easy anymore, not after everything that had happened. The truth was staring me in the face, as clear and sharp as the photos filling my screen. They didn't want me there. I didn't fit the image they wanted to project to the world, the shiny, happy family full of success stories and perfect teeth. Sick, broke Jake didn't belong in that world anymore. Not when he was a walking reminder that sometimes life doesn't wrap itself up neatly with a bow. Somewhere between the third champagne fountain picture and the endless parade of dancing videos, something inside me cracked wide open, a deep, hollow kind of hurt that no amount of anger could patch over. I thought about every time I had bent over backward for them, every emergency babysitting session, every late-night ride across town, every loan I knew I would never see repaid, every holiday meal where I brought the only decent side dish because nobody else bothered. I thought about Dad, too, about how he would have hated this, how he used to say that family wasn't about blood. It was about who showed up when it mattered, about who carried you when you couldn't carry yourself. If he had been here, maybe things would have been different. Maybe someone would have looked around that glittering ballroom and asked, "Hey, where's Jake?" But Dad had been gone 10 years now, and with him had gone the last real glue holding this mess together. The bitterness rose up in me like bile, hot and mean and unstoppable, and for a second, I thought about posting something raw and ugly that would crash through their perfect little narrative like a brick through a stained glass window. I pictured the words in my head, imagined the way they would squirm reading them, but in the end, I didn't post anything. I didn't comment. I didn't even hit like. Because the truth is, sometimes silence is the loudest thing you can say, and my silence was screaming louder than any words I could have typed. I set the phone down on the armrest, leaned back into the lumpy couch cushions, and stared at the ceiling fan spinning in lazy, useless circles. My body ached in places I hadn't known existed before the surgery, a dull, grinding throb that matched the hollow place growing inside my chest. Somewhere, just a few miles away, the party of the year was still roaring on, champagne flowing like rivers, laughter echoing off the high walls of rented luxury, and not a single soul there was thinking about the brother left behind. The one who wasn't pretty enough or shiny enough to fit into their perfect little night. And maybe that was the real heartbreak, not that they forgot me, but that they remembered me and decided they were better off pretending I wasn't there at all. The morning after the wedding felt like the world had tilted slightly off its axis, the sky outside my window too bright, the sounds of life outside my apartment door too sharp. Like the whole damn universe was moving on without me and not even bothering to leave a forwarding address. I sat at the kitchen table, sipping bitter coffee that tasted like regret, my stomach a roiling mess of anger and shame, and something that felt dangerously close to grief. The pictures were still stuck in my mind, flashing across my memory like some cruel slideshow. Ryan's smug smile, Laura's fake perfect laugh. All of them lit up in $1,000 glow while I sat alone in a $200 recliner fighting off the kind of loneliness that doesn't wash away with a good night's sleep. I told myself to let it go, to be the bigger person, to just shove it down like I had done 100 times before, but some things, once cracked open, don't close back up so easy, and somewhere deep inside me, a fuse had been lit, slow burning but certain. Around noon my phone buzzed, a cheerful little ping that made my stomach tighten instantly, because I knew, before I even looked, that it would be them. Sure enough, it was Laura, sending a group text with photos from the wedding, her message chirpy and bright like the whole world was just one big goddamn cupcake, saying, "Hope you're feeling better, Jake. Wish you could have been there, it was magical." Magical. That was the word she used, like the sight of all of them dancing under chandeliers while I counted loose change for groceries was some Disney movie moment we were all supposed to feel good about. No apology. No explanation. Just the hollow politeness of someone who already knew they had screwed you over but figured if they said something sweet enough, you might forget to stay angry. A few minutes later, Ryan chimed in with his own masterpiece of bullshit, texting, "Yeah, bro, we figured you wouldn't feel up to it, but we were thinking about you. Hope you're doing okay." I stared at the screen, so long the letters started to blur, the fake concern oozing off the messages like grease off a cheap burger, and it hit me all at once, harder than any punch I'd ever taken, that they weren't sorry for what they had done. They were sorry if I happened to be upset about it. That was the difference, and it was a big one, big enough to make something inside me snap the way old wood cracks under too much weight. I didn't even think about it. I hit call on Ryan's number, my hands shaking not from nerves, but from a kind of pure, exhausted rage that didn't leave room for fear anymore. He picked up on the second ring, his voice all fake casual like he didn't have a clue why I might be calling. Jake. Hey, man, how's it going? He said, and I swear to God, if I could have reached through the phone and grabbed him by the collar, I would have. How's it going? I said, my voice low and shaking in a way that made even me sit up a little straighter. You really want to ask me that after the stunt you pulled? There was a pause, that slippery kind of silence people use when they're scrambling to find the right lie that'll make everything go away, and then he laughed, a short, nervous bark that made my skin crawl. Come on, Jake, don't be like that, he said, like I was the one being unreasonable. We figured you wouldn't want to be around all that, you know, with you still recovering and all. It's not like we didn't think about you. I closed my eyes, forced myself to breathe, because the rage was hot and sharp, rising up so fast I could barely see straight. You didn't think about me, I said, each word slow and deliberate like I was teaching a kid how to tie his shoes. You thought about how it would look, having your busted up brother limping around your fairy tale wedding. You thought about the pictures, about the stories you could tell your new in-laws. You didn't want me there because I didn't fit the damn image you're selling. Another long pause, heavier this time, like even he couldn't quite come up with the right spin. Jake, it's not always about you, man, Ryan said finally, his voice slipping into that smug, tired tone he used to use when I caught him lying about taking money from Dad's wallet back when we were kids. You gotta stop acting like you're the center of the universe. Not about me. Not about me. I felt the words hit like a hammer to the chest, knocking the wind out of me harder than anything else he could have said. Not about the hospital bed, not about the bills piling up, not about the nights spent wondering if I was going to die alone while my so-called family toasted champagne under fairy lights. You're right, I said finally, my voice flat and hollow. It's not about me. It's about what you all showed me. Ryan started to say something else, some pathetic excuse or weak defense, but I didn't hear it because I hung up, the sound of the call ending ringing louder in my ears than any apology he could have choked out. I sat there for a long time afterward, the phone still in my hand, feeling the slow, heavy realization settle over me like a second skin. I was never going to be a part of that world again. Whatever thread had once tied me to them, frayed and fragile though it had been, had finally snapped under the weight of their indifference. I wasn't just uninvited. I wasn't just forgotten. I was unwanted, an afterthought they were happy to leave behind as they built their new lives full of fake smiles and hollow words. And sitting there in the thick, stifling air of my tiny kitchen, I realized something even colder than the rejection. I didn't want them either. Not anymore. Not at any price. Not even if they begged. Because some things, once broken, stay broken forever. And maybe, just maybe, that was the best damn thing that could have happened to me. There's a moment after a big fight when the world goes eerily still, not because everything is fixed or forgotten, but because the storm has finally spent itself and left behind a strange, hollow silence where the shouting used to be. That was how it felt sitting there in my kitchen after hanging up on Ryan, the silence pressing against my eardrums so hard it was almost deafening, my hands still clenched into fists on the table. The phone lying face down like even it was ashamed of being part of this mess. I sat there for a long time, staring at nothing, feeling the old anger boil and cool in my veins, not burning hot like it had when I first called, but settling into something heavier, something colder, something a hell of a lot more dangerous, because it was steady and sure. I realized in that moment that I was done. Not angry done. Not see you at Christmas after we've cooled off done, but really, truly finished. I was done with them the way you are done with a house that burns down to the foundation. There is no rebuilding from some ruins. I picked up my phone and, without thinking twice, started the process. First, I blocked Ryan's number, watching the screen flash confirmation like a door slamming shut in his face. Then Laura's number, and after that, every cousin, uncle, and family friend who had liked, shared, or commented on those damn wedding photos without sparing a thought for where I might have been. I went into my social media accounts next, removing, blocking, deleting, each click a small, satisfying snap of a chain breaking free. It felt mechanical at first, like I was just going through the motions, but somewhere in the middle of it, my hands started to shake, not with fear, but with something deeper, something I hadn't let myself feel in a long, long time: grief. Not grief for the people I was cutting loose, but grief for the life I had convinced myself still existed. The life where family meant Sunday dinners and hospital visits and borrowed trucks on moving day. Not just a collection of pretty pictures and empty promises. I didn't cry, not in the way you might expect, not big, heaving sobs, but the tears came anyway, hot and silent, carving slow tracks down my cheeks as I clicked unfriend and block like I was deleting old, broken parts of myself that had finally rotted beyond saving. It wasn't just grief that flooded me, though. Underneath it, tangled up so tightly I could barely tell them apart, was freedom. For the first time in my adult life, I didn't owe anyone an explanation for my pain. I didn't have to justify why I was hurt or why I wasn't smiling through it for their convenience. I didn't have to make myself smaller or quieter or easier to love. I could just be, without apology, without fear. The first few days after cutting them off were strange in the way that getting a cast taken off your arm is strange. You know you're free, but you still move like you're shackled, still wince expecting a pain that doesn't come. I kept expecting a knock at the door, a tearful voicemail, something dramatic and messy the way families on TV always seem to patch things up at the last second. But nothing came. No calls. No messages. Not a goddamn thing. It was like I had never existed in their world to begin with. At first, it hurt more than I wanted to admit, the silence thick and heavy around me, but slowly, the world started to shift. Little things changed, things that I might not have noticed if I'd still been drowning under the weight of pretending everything was fine. One afternoon, just as the sun was starting to sink low and set the sky on fire with gold and pink, my neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, knocked on my door, holding a chipped ceramic pot wrapped in a faded towel. She was an old widow, lived 2 doors down, always smelled faintly of lavender and cigarettes. Without waiting for an invitation, she shoved the pot into my hands and said, "You look like hell, Jake. Eat this." Inside was the best chicken soup I had ever tasted, thick with dumplings and heavy with garlic, and for the first time in weeks, I ate until my stomach ached, feeling something that almost tasted like hope. A few days later, Mark, a guy I barely talked to at work except for the occasional small talk by the coffee machine, pulled me aside and said he had heard about my surgery through the grapevine. He didn't ask for details, didn't pry, just pressed a gas card into my hand and said, "Use it if you need it, man." No strings. It wasn't much, maybe $50, but it felt like someone had tossed me a lifeline when I had started to forget how to swim. Real support, I realized, doesn't come from grand gestures or big speeches. It comes in chicken soup and gas cards and awkward, silent moments where someone sees you struggling and chooses, without fanfare or obligation, to show up anyway. I wasn't healed, not by a long shot. The hospital bills still loomed, a mountain I would be chipping away at for years. The loneliness still crept in some nights, especially when the world got too quiet and the shadows started whispering about all the things I had lost. But for the first time, I wasn't chasing after people who had shown me, in ways loud and cruel and clear, that they didn't care if I sank or swam. I was learning, painfully and slowly, that being related by blood didn't mean you owed anyone your loyalty, your love, or your forgiveness. Loyalty is earned, not owed, and love that demands you suffer in silence isn't love at all. It's control wrapped up in a bow and handed to you, with a guilt trip tucked underneath. Breaking the chain wasn't easy, And it sure as hell wasn't clean, but sitting there on my battered old porch with a half-eaten bowl of Mrs. Henderson's soup on the step beside me and the stars just starting to blink awake in the evening sky, I realized maybe, just maybe, it was the only way I had a real shot at saving myself. And saving myself, after all the wreckage they left behind, felt like the biggest victory of all. It started about a week after I cut them off, slow and almost sneaky at first, like a trickle of water finding a crack in the foundation, but it didn't stay small for long, because if there's one thing families are good at when they feel like you've wronged them, it's guilt. Pure and weaponized, served up in big steaming piles that smell just enough like love to make you second-guess whether you should eat it anyway. The first message came from Laura, because of course it did, all saccharine and hurt, her words dancing across my voicemail like sugar trying to hide the taste of poison, telling me she missed me, telling me she was sorry if I had misunderstood everything that happened. And wasn't it a shame that something so beautiful as Ryan's wedding had turned into such an ugly thing? Because family is all we really have in this world, Jake, and wasn't I tired of being angry? I deleted the message without listening to the end, the sound of her voice tightening something painful inside my chest. But the seed had been planted, and seeds, once dropped into the cracks of your heart, have a nasty way of growing whether you want them to or not. 2 days later, it was Uncle Don, calling from his retirement trailer in Arizona where he had spent the better part of 20 years ignoring the rest of us. His voice slow and heavy with the kind of manufactured wisdom only a man who never stuck around for the hard parts of life could muster, telling me that, Jake, you're tearing the family apart over nothing. Buddy, just let it go and come back home. Home. What a goddamn joke that was. The idea that there was still some warm place waiting for me if I would just swallow my pride and pretend none of this ever happened. As if forgiveness was something you could squeeze out of a man the way you wring water from an old rag. The messages kept coming, some from people I hadn't heard from in years, old friends of the family, cousins I barely knew, all weighing in with their unsolicited opinions, their sad little lectures about how life is too short to hold grudges. About how anger poisons the one who carries it more than the one it's aimed at, about how family sticks together even when it's hard, and shouldn't I be the bigger man? And God help me, for a while, I started to believe them. Because the mind is a funny thing when it's lonely, when it's battered and bruised and half-healed, and it will start digging through the junk drawers of your memory looking for anything it can use to convince you to crawl back to the people who hurt you, even if it knows damn well that you'll just get cut again. I found myself thinking about birthdays when we were kids, about Laura baking me a lopsided cake shaped like a football because she knew how badly I wanted to make the team that year, even though I was the clumsiest kid on the field. I remembered Christmas mornings with Ryan, both of us tearing into presents with sticky, candy cane hands, the two of us wrapped in matching flannel pajamas our mother had stayed up late sewing by hand. I thought about the backyard cookouts when Dad was still alive, the smell of burnt hamburgers and cheap beer in the air, the sound of country music twanging from a battered old radio, the way we had all laughed so hard that our sides hurt, the way it felt like nothing could ever go wrong as long as we had each other. I thought about all of it, and the memories wrapped themselves around my heart like barbed wire disguised as ribbon, pulling tighter and tighter until I could barely breathe. Maybe I was being too harsh, I thought late one night, lying awake in the sticky summer heat, staring at the cracked ceiling like it might have answers hidden between the water stains. Maybe I was being selfish, wallowing in my own anger while the rest of them were just trying to move forward, just trying to build something better out of the broken pieces we all carried. Maybe, just maybe, I was the asshole here. The thought dug its claws in deep, gnawing at the edges of every decision I had made since the hospital, whispering that maybe forgiveness wasn't supposed to be earned, that maybe real love meant letting people screw up and forgiving them anyway, even when they didn't ask for it, even when they didn't deserve it. I carried that doubt around with me for days, heavy and silent, dragging it behind me like a chain, until it started to seep into everything, the way I moved, the way I spoke, the way I caught myself reaching for the phone every time it buzzed, half hoping, half dreading that it would be someone else telling me how wrong I was to hurt the people who had hurt me. And still, somewhere deep down, a small, stubborn voice refused to be silenced, whispering the truth I didn't want to hear but couldn't quite ignore, that love without respect is just control, that forgiveness without change is just surrender. And that going back would mean sacrificing the little piece of self-worth I had fought so hard to reclaim from the wreckage. The guilt parade kept marching on, loud and bright and insistent, but I stayed inside, away from the noise, away from the temptation to throw myself under their wheels just to make the music stop. Because sometimes being the bigger person isn't about swallowing your pride and pretending you aren't bleeding. Sometimes it's about standing up, even when your knees shake, and saying no more, even when the only person clapping for you is yourself. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The envelope was cream-colored and slightly creased at the corners, with my name written across the front in my mother's neat, careful handwriting, the same handwriting that had once labeled my brown bag lunches with little hearts in the corner. The same loops and swirls that had filled out field trip forms and Christmas cards and birthday messages for over 4 decades of my life. It arrived in the mailbox one damp Tuesday morning, buried between a past-due electricity notice and a coupon for carpet cleaning I'd never use, and it sat on the counter for nearly 2 hours before I could bring myself to open it, because somehow I already knew what was waiting inside. There was no return address, no glitter or stickers like she sometimes used for festive notes, just a plain envelope and that name, Jake. Like the last fragile thread tying me to a woman who used to be my greatest comfort and had now become a stranger wrapped in silence. When I finally opened it, the first thing that fell out was a photo, me and Ryan, sitting on the porch steps of our childhood home, our knees scraped and our hands covered in popsicle juice, grinning at something just out of frame, eyes squinting against the sun. The memory hit hard and fast, like a slap in the chest, and I had to sit down before I even started reading the letter itself, already feeling the walls I had built over the last few weeks begin to groan under the weight of something I wasn't ready for. The letter was 3 pages long, written in blue ink with the kind of deliberate care that only comes from someone who's rewritten every line at least twice. It was full of the usual phrases that families cling to like lifeboats in a storm. We miss you. This isn't what your father would have wanted. And the one that landed like a hammer right between my eyes. Jake, family is forever. I read it once all the way through, then again a second time, slower, trying to figure out whether she meant it or just hoped it would be enough to pull me back. She wrote about the wedding, about how she regretted not stepping in when she saw what was happening, about how she felt caught between her children and didn't know how to keep the peace. She didn't defend Ryan, exactly, but she didn't condemn him either, which felt almost worse, like silence painted as neutrality, like watching someone drown and calling it respect for their independence. She said she understood I was hurt, but she hoped that in time I could find it in my heart to forgive, because families make mistakes, Jake, but that doesn't mean we stop loving each other. It was everything I had expected her to say, everything she thought I needed to hear, and still, it dug into me like barbed wire, dragging up things I had buried so deep I almost forgot they were there. The time Ryan broke my guitar and blamed me for it. And she made me apologize so he wouldn't feel bad the time I got into college, and she told me maybe I should stay home to save money, right after she co-signed a car loan for my sister without blinking, the birthday she forgot because Laura was going through a breakup, the Thanksgiving I spent alone because no one thought to tell me they'd changed the location. Each memory crawled to the surface like ghosts summoned by her words, not loud or dramatic, but quiet and cutting. And I realized, with a kind of sick clarity, that this wasn't about just one wedding or one moment of betrayal. This was about a lifetime of being the one who bent while everyone else stood tall, of being the one who swallowed his pride so others could save face. And now here she was, asking me to do it one more time, to shove the anger down and come back into the fold like the good son I'd always tried to be, like the wounds hadn't been reopened by their silence. Like love was supposed to mean tolerating the same pain over and over just because it came with a familiar name. I wanted to call her, I really did. I wanted to hear her voice and tell her that I missed her too, that I still dreamed about the smell of her chicken pot pie and the way she used to hum old Patsy Cline songs while folding laundry. That part of me still wanted to believe that if I just gave it time, the family I thought I had might find its way back to me. But another part of me, the one that had been alone in that hospital room, the one that had eaten soup from a neighbor instead of a sister, the one that had woken up every morning for weeks knowing his pain didn't matter to the people who claimed to love him. That part of me wasn't ready to hand over forgiveness just because it was expected. I folded the letter carefully, smoothed it with my palm, and slid it back into the envelope. I didn't throw it away. I didn't light it on fire in some dramatic, movie scene act of defiance. I just placed it inside the drawer next to the unpaid bills and closed it softly, because even though I wasn't ready to respond, I wasn't quite ready to forget either. Standing at the crossroads between the past and whatever comes next is the kind of place that leaves your feet heavy and your heart unsure, and I didn't know what the right move was, didn't know if silence was strength or cowardice, if walking away made me the villain in their story or just the hero of my own. All I knew was this: I couldn't go home again, not to that version of home, not to the people who lived in it like their love had an expiration date. Maybe someday we'd find each other again in some middle ground between pain and peace, but today wasn't that day. Today, I chose the only thing I had left, myself. The sky was beginning to soften at the edges, that soft blue just before dusk where everything looks gentler than it really is, and I sat on my porch with a mug of coffee that had gone cold in my hands, watching the neighborhood kids ride their bikes in wide, looping circles down the street like they had no idea the world could ever break your heart. The apartment was quiet behind me, a different kind of quiet than before, not the heavy silence of abandonment, but the calm that follows after you've finally set something down you were never meant to carry in the first place. There was still pain, of course. Still that dull ache in the parts of me I couldn't name, a soreness where the guilt used to live, like a scar that never quite faded. But there was peace too, unexpected and strange and a little bittersweet, like finding a forgotten song that used to make you cry, but now only makes you smile with the edges of your mouth. No calls came that evening, no apologies, no more letters, and for once, I didn't wait for them. Maybe someday I'll forgive them. Maybe. But today? Today, I'm free.